What does a brand new electric car look like after no one has ever driven it? In a field in Hangzhou, China, over 2,000 zero-mileage electric vehicles sit in perfect rows, hoods rusting, tires sinking into wet marsh earth, charging ports sealed shut since the day they arrived. But this is not a storage yard. This is evidence, left in the open, visible from space, of one of the largest financial extraction schemes running on the planet right now. And your pension fund, your government's energy subsidies, your trade tariffs, they are all downstream of what is rotting in that field. Who architected this machine? Wang Chuanfu is the CEO of BYD, the company that overtook Tesla as the world's largest electric vehicle seller. His flagship product, the BYD Seal sedan, is sold to the world as the future of clean transportation. The future. But the graveyards are not a side effect of the empire Wang Chuanfu operates inside. They are a feature of it. A system where the act of manufacturing a car generates more financial value than the act of selling one is not a car business. It is a heist business. Here is the instrument they've built to feed it. 1.4 million electric vehicles were registered to shell companies, ghost entities with no employees, no addresses, no customers, for the sole purpose of triggering state subsidy payments before the cars were abandoned. 1.4 million. The registration itself was the product. The car was irrelevant. The subsidy check cleared, the shell company dissolved, and 2,000 units ended up sinking into a marsh while the money moved somewhere else entirely. Where? That is the question the satellite images cannot answer. What they built was not a loophole, it was a precision instrument. Each registration was timed to the subsidy window, filed through entities designed to exist for exactly long enough to collect the payment and then vanish. The state, the same state that funded the subsidies, cannot locate the beneficial owners. The offshore accounts where the extracted capital landed have never been publicly identified. And behind that wall of silence, 2,000 units are sinking into a marsh with a cleanup plan that hasn't even been written yet. Nobody planned for that part, because nobody planned to sell the cars. This is not a story about oversupply. It is not a story about a market that moved too fast. The ghost registration protocol ran 1.4 million times, not by accident, not by a rogue subsidiary, but across the coordinated output of an entire industrial system. The graveyard in Hangzhou is not an anomaly. It is a receipt. 1.4 million ghost registrations. What if the car was never the product, and the factory was just the cover story? Buried inside a Munich intellectual property court ruling from 2025, auditors confirmed 40,000 lines of proprietary source code lifted directly from Tesla and Volkswagen vehicle software. Architecture that took those companies a decade and billions of dollars to build, replicated inside Chinese EV platforms without a license, without a payment, without a single acknowledged transaction. Stolen. Not borrowed, not inspired, not reverse engineered at arm's length. Stolen, line by line, and compiled into the competitive advantage that makes the price tag on every exported unit look like a miracle of manufacturing efficiency. It is not a miracle. It is a crime scene with a showroom attached. But the theft of code is only the surface layer. Li Le-chung, Minister of Industry and Information Technology, presides over the regulatory architecture that makes the deeper mechanism possible. His ministry claimed the 60-day pledge shortened supplier payments to 60 days, from prior 275 days. Sounds generous, doesn't it? But those 275-day delays already extracted hundreds of billions in free capital from suppliers, cash they'll never recover. The suppliers got a faster invoice and a slower death. And for every unit that survives the supply chain and reaches a foreign port, the extraction deepens. Manufacturers collect a state rebate worth 35% of the production cost on every single exported vehicle. 35%. That rebate, confirmed by the EU Commission in 2025, means a Chinese EV can be sold below the cost of its own components in a European or American market, and the manufacturer still turns a profit. Your domestic automaker is not losing a price war. They are losing a subsidy war, and they are fighting it with one hand tied behind their back, while the other side collects a government check on the way out the door. Underneath the rebate structure, the labor cost is engineered to be structurally impossible to compete with. Workers inside cartel-linked facilities operate on what China Labor Watch documented in 2025 as the 7-11-7 schedule. 7 days a week, 11 hours a day, 7 days before a rest day is permitted. This is not a cultural work ethic. This is a schedule that violates China's own national labor laws. Laws that exist on paper, enforced selectively, ignored systematically wherever the production volume demands it. The price advantage built into every exported unit is not an engineering achievement. It is the unpaid hours of a worker who has no legal recourse and no exit. That is what is inside the price tag. And with the capital extracted from suppliers, from stolen code, from subsidized exports, and from labor that costs a fraction of its legal floor, the cartel moved on the one resource that controls the entire EV industry's future. Cartel-linked entities cornered 72% of global lithium refining capacity. 72%. Not manufacturing, not mining, refining. The choke point that every battery on the planet must pass through before it becomes a product. The graveyards described earlier were not waste. They were leverage, proof of volume, proof of market dominance, proof that the system works well enough to abandon 2,000 cars in a marsh and still control the material that builds the next 2 million. 72% of the refining choke point. That is the lock. What happens to $12 billion when it travels through the Cayman Islands and never comes back? Audits pulled from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists database confirmed that $12 billion, classified on the books as government grants, was funneled through Cayman-registered entities and landed inside executive personal holdings. Not reinvested in production. Not returned to the state that issued the grants, not distributed to the supplier workforce described earlier. Taken. Wang Chuanfu operates at the apex of a system where the public subsidy machine runs in one direction, outward, upward, offshore, and the paper trail ends at a wall of shell entities that no regulator has yet broken through. The grants cleared. The accounts vanished. The cars rotted in a field. But the grants are not the deepest layer. What they call the balance sheet of the top 5 manufacturers is not a balance sheet. It is a confession. Those 5 companies collectively operate with $98 billion in negative working capital. Negative. That means the system owes more to its immediate creditors than it holds in liquid assets. Right now, today. A business with negative working capital is not a going concern. It is a going extraction, kept alive not by revenue, not by profit, but by the next injection of state credit, the next supplier forced to wait, the next subsidy window opened by a ministry that cannot afford to let the machine stop. The factory floor is not a production facility. It is a life support machine for a debt that was never meant to be repaid. And the life support has a price tag. State banks issued $450 billion in revolving loans, not to fund new production, not to build new facilities, but specifically to cover the interest payments on the phantom car debt already accumulated. $450 billion. Loans to pay the interest on loans. That is not a financial strategy. That is a structure that cannot survive contact with reality. A system borrowing against tomorrow to pay for yesterday, expanding the hole while calling it a solution. The state banks that issued those loans are the same institutions holding your government's sovereign debt instruments, your pension funds' fixed income allocations, your country's foreign exchange reserves. The contagion is not coming. It is already inside the architecture. The exit was always the point. Pull it all the way back. The stolen code, the engineered labor cost, the export rebate, the cornered refining capacity, the supplier squeeze. Every mechanism described in this investigation feeds a single number: $323 billion of phantom debt, the accumulated weight of subsidies extracted, loans issued to cover loans, working capital stripped from suppliers, and capital routed offshore through entities that no longer exist. This is not a market correction waiting to happen. This is not a bubble that will quietly deflate. $323 billion of phantom debt. No exit, no plan. The machine is counting on your silence until the invoice lands on your doorstep. Subscribe to Leviathan Files. Join the inner circle before the architecture collapses.